good afternoon, everybody. I realise it's the graveyard shift of the conference, and I'll try and make it as sort of non-boring as possible. I actually have a slide on graves coming up. I have spent the best part of a 30-year career in what I think of as financial plumbing. That is the business of providing the networks on which everyday commerce in each jurisdiction relies. The stuff we all use every single day without even thinking about it. So I'm not going to give you a 15-minute advert on BankservAfrica because I don't need to. You already are very, very big customers of it. And of course, the really big question is it in fact going to be disintermediated by blockchain or blockchain-like technologies or some evolution of the journey we're on now? I'm not going to give you the answer to that question, I'm sorry, because I don't think anyone knows. But with 30 years experience in helping large-scale ecosystems, that's probably the modern way, we used to call them national payment systems, but let's call them large-scale ecosystems for the purposes of this audience. 30 years of experience of getting people in national payment systems to build new national payment systems. That's kind of the fun part of what I do. I have a few ideas about the challenges if you really want to take on that holy grail of applying a blockchain to mainstream domestic payments. Okay, so I'm not talking about all the other very interesting applications for blockchain technology, distributed ledger technologies, which you will have heard about at this conference, and I have no ability to tell you whether they're a great idea or not. What I'm saying to you is if the holy grail is mainstream domestic transactions, payments on the blockchain, and let's face it, Bitcoin wouldn't be worth, actually I checked it just coming on, 11,000 Australian, so what's that, about 9,000 US at the moment, come down a bit, but still a very respectable amount, wouldn't be worth that unless at least some people think that's an outside chance, because that's the holy grail, am I right? So I've spent my life building new technologies for these kind of big ecosystems. So I've got a few ideas about why it's hard and the challenges that will have to be overcome. Do not read me as saying that means I think it'll never happen, but do read me as saying I think we have to get past this kind of thinking. We have to get past this kind of thinking. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying it's not all that helpful. This is like the Holy Grail thing. This is the nirvana. If we use this technology, it'll all be okay, right? And look, he might be right, but I'm not really that interested. I'm much more interested in what the path is. We can all specify an environment where, if we could be there, it would be so much better. There's no question about that. Do I think the payment systems work perfectly today? No, of course not. Are they on very old technology? Yes, they absolutely are. In fact, not only are they on old technology, they're on several generations behind technology. Why? It's nothing to do with technology. It's all about network effects. It's all about the fact that it's a very large, complex ecosystem which all has to change in a coordinated way if you're going to change the underlying technology. People systematically underestimate the importance of network effects. And if you take one thing from this 15 minutes, it's that. People systematically underestimate the importance of network effects. And I'll try and explain what I mean. So, anybody remember this? Hands up, who's ever heard of Mondex? There's a bit of a clue in the configuration of the bubbles, which might look a little bit like something that you've heard of before, but it's not that. The reason why it looks like that is because this particular technology was bought by MasterCard at one point in its career, and this is just a logo from that era. This was groundbreaking payments technology in the 90s, in the early 90s, right? This was a brilliant idea by a couple of English boffins who managed to persuade a significant number of English banks to implement it in a series of trials, and also subsequently it got bought by MasterCard and trialled in multiple places around the world as well. This was a fully stored value instant transaction card. You think about that in the early 90s, right? Which worked fantastically well, technologically speaking. Every trial that was done, people loved it. It was incredibly reliable. It worked beautifully. Where is it today? Nowhere. Shame, really, because it was a bloody good idea. Okay. Now, opposite of the spectrum, the good old check system. The company that I now run was started 46 years ago to do check processing. And that used to consist of literally hundreds of trucks coming in every afternoon at about 4:30 and unloading large bundles of paper, and that all being processed in various increasingly automated ways, so that the money could move from one bank to the other and ultimately from one account to the other. It doesn't matter about the details now. So that was the original Banks of Africa. That's now a very, very tiny part of our business. But guess what? It's still alive. It won't die, right? The cheque system is not a good payment system anymore. There are many, many better payment systems, and they are very, very widely distributed. But can we shut cheques down in this country? Anyone want to take a guess? I don't think so. And why, again? It's not about the technology. The technology is not great. Let's accept that. It's about the network effect. It's about the fact that there are a significant number of people who grew up with cheques, who know how cheques work, who feel really secure about cheques, and who continue to want to use them. And for as long as they can find another in their increasingly small club who is going to accept their cheque, then they're going to be happy and they're going to keep using it. You see this phenomenon over and over again in payment systems. Old payment systems do not die. New payment systems are really hard to start. And it has nothing to do with the technology. Feeling optimistic at this point? So it's kind of simple, really. The disruptive potential of technology is really interesting and exciting, and anyone who's read Rogers on diffusion of innovation will understand this more deeply because he spends a lot of time talking about it. But that gets the early adopters in, that gets them really excited in the technology, gets them to play with it, and then he charts a complex path of how you gradually adopt into mainstream. The problem is he wasn't specifically thinking about network technologies, which have an order of magnitude more difficult adoption curve, for the simple reason that it doesn't matter how fantastic the early adoption is if you don't have critical mass. In other words, if there isn't a high probability that when someone wants to use that payment technology, the other side wants to use that payment technology as well. In other words, if you haven't got the network effect working in the positive way rather than the negative way, it's not going to fly, even if it's genuinely much better than whatever's there at the moment. So the problem is utility, as in just usableness and convenience and all that sort of stuff, and disruptive potential by themselves are not enough. Not a bad place to start, I grant you, but we have to work out how we're going to do that if you really want to hit that holy grail. So this is the only remotely technical part of the thing, and I'm not a technologist, so don't read this as a technological diagram in any way. It isn't that. It is my conception of the layering of the complex business network that exists in payments. And I think you can apply this to any payments infrastructure, right? Going to be proved wrong as soon as I say that, but anyway, let's give it a go, hey? The point is that in any network there are multiple nodes, of course, simplified diagram, but there is a universe of nodes. And there is a complex layering of interconnecting networks that bolt those nodes together and allow the payment system to work reliably and repeatedly over a substantial period of time. And I've just characterized what the business functionality in each of those networks is. This is not a technology diagram. This is a business functionality fiction, right? So, in my mind, the very basic level of that you need to solve for at a network level is what's your unit of value, right? So here, most of the time, it's the RAND, at the moment at least. And any payment network is going to have to resolve itself on that. There can be multiple units of value, but you have to make it some limited set of decisions, right? Then you've got to work out how that currency gets out into the world. And this is not fantastically well understood often. It's a bit of an arcane science because mostly central banks are the only people that worry about it. But of course, this is where fiat currency comes in as the dominant mechanism today, in the sense that what actually happens in most modern societies is that the government licenses banks to create money. That's the kind of the fiat currency theory, right? So the distribution mechanism for RAND is licensed banks being able to, through credit creation, create money that is then fed into the liquidity of the system, right? That is in itself a complex network that is maintained on a national basis. Above that, you've got to store these bloody things somewhere, right? So that's the bank account system that we all know and love in the legacy framework. There's circulation mechanisms. Now for Rand, of course, there are multiple circulation mechanisms. Visa, MasterCard, probably most of your salaries are paid by EFT, which you probably don't even think about every day, but is actually the main carrier of routine value in the payment system. Debit orders, early debit orders. We in South Africa love having new payment systems, and so we have more different kinds of payment systems than most countries on earth. I don't really know why that is, because I don't come from here, but it's true. So, and so, you know, and you can build plenty of new ones off the same stack, right? This gets then into the more fintechy type of world. So the integration step is where you take your distribution mechanism and make it usable for the person in the street, for the woman in the street, right? And again, there are many, many ways of doing that. But, you know, in checks, the integration mechanism is the checkbook, right? It's not very exciting. But obviously an app on a phone that converts your card transaction is an integration mechanism. A wallet on your phone that does that. It's an integration mechanism, right? And then above that, the bit that you don't see the payment system doing a lot of by itself, but you see a lot of fintechs playing in this space, is where you actually integrate all of that stuff into whatever it is you want to do the payment for. So let's run through a real example of that. Uber, okay? So the Uber is actually the top end of this, because they've found a way of taking all of this stack of stuff and making it invisible to you guys so that you just get in the car and ride and get out again and you don't worry about the payment step, right? It's another network on top of dozens of networks. And this one's just a worked example going up that stack of Uber in South Africa, right, as an example. You can do this for any payment infrastructure. Why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this to try and demonstrate the complexity of the interrelated networks that go to make up the stuff you don't think about every day in Rand, right? If we want to chuck that out and replace it with Bitcoin, well, the first observation to make is it's kind of a hard place to start, because you're not starting up the top here where you can just change the top couple of networks. You're starting down here. You're saying, yeah, let's just chuck the entire complex integrated system out and start again. And again, the network effect is going to kill you. You have to actually solve for every network change at every level to make that a success. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying it ain't going to be easy, right? And you're going to have to think very carefully about particular closed segments where that can be done in a sensible way. So how do we make this a little bit easier? It's probably the way to think about it. Let's go back to the previous slide. Oop, there we go. No, not that one. I'll get to that one in a second. Okay, so if you think about that generalized model again, maybe what you want to do is not try and attack the very basic layers first, but try and start up here somewhere and work your way down. How would we do that? Well, we may want to just do something clever with blockchain up here that integrates distribution networks, that connects things together. Gary was telling me about something called Telcoin, is that right? That was on earlier today. That sounds a little bit like it might be one of those. I'm not an expert, but you know, so it maybe is attacking a particular network infrastructure that may be more ready to change. By the way, if you're a follower of fintech generally, what you'll see is the great bulk of fintech payment applications are up here. They're nowhere near this stack down here. Why? Well, for very good reason. If you're in fintech, you want a 3-year turnaround. You want your money out and making money in 3 years. Taking on a network is not a good way to do that, right? What you want to be doing is working up here and trying to take your existing stack and adapt it to something new and interesting that people want and make money that way. A very, very sensible and rational decision process, right? But you can actually, the interesting thing is that you can actually think about applying blockchain at each of these layers, bearing in mind the sort of the rule of thumb that the lower you go, the more you've got to do up here at the same time. You can't just do that one and leave these ones unchanged. That doesn't work that way, I'm afraid. So, for example, the experiments of central banks around cryptocurrency issues of their underlying value leaves that alone, and in fact, depending on how designed it, leaves that alone and just starts playing with this stuff up here, which seems like a kind of a good idea to me, because it's actually going to be so much easier, an order of magnitude easier to do that than to actually attack the entire stack at once. And if you, and I haven't heard all the presentations for the last 2 days, but if you want to look at any cryptocurrency proposal or idea, this might be a mechanism for kind of unbundling it, for working out how hard it's going to be to implement. Remember, my interest here is not at all whether it's the best thing since sliced bread. I'm happy to accept that. My interest here is how we're going to get there. So, this is my nostrum for the things you've got to answer for yourself. If you want to change a network, history suggests, and this is a human observation, not a technology observation, there are only really 3 ways of changing a network or of implementing a new network. The first one is nothing's there at the moment, right? And there are lots of examples of things getting away because there was just a massive gap. And indeed, I think you can argue PayPal's probably a good example of that, because PayPal got going. You may know the history of PayPal, that it was originally a payment app for Palm Pilots. No one has a Palm Pilot now, but that was the early history. And it bumbled around, not doing a whole lot except techies who loved it. That's the Rogers diffusion curve thing again, right? Until the people who had it realised that there was this big gap where emerging e-commerce didn't have any way of being paid and being paid. So that, because the card companies and the banks were slow to get into the space of supporting online transactions. That's where PayPal comes from. So it took a specific green field and filled it in. Sure, great idea. Disaster's always a good one, and the one that springs immediately to mind is Venezuela right now. Okay, so currency's tanked, financial system, again, consistent with the stack, the whole thing's falling apart because the currency's tanked. So the answer is find another network that can replace that reasonably quickly, and I think that seems to be what's happening in Venezuela at the moment with Bitcoin. And the third one, of course, is regulation. It is possible for a higher power to tell us to adopt a network, and they sometimes do. And some of the really smart standards introductions by governments are examples of making this happen. It is actually possible for the government to sponsor the creation of an entirely new payment infrastructure. And we might see that happening soon. I just saw a little report that the Marshall Islands, which has always been quite inventive in terms of its regulatory framework, has issued the world's first new cryptocurrency, national cryptocurrency. So, that I think, again, is an example of where, potentially the government can force. But if you don't have either of those 3 things going for you, I'm suggesting you're pushing it uphill a little bit. I'm suggesting that it's going to be a challenge, and you might want to pick an easier network to challenge. So the challenge in national payments is that the technology is always evolving, and a rule of thumb is that any complex network is going to be a couple of cycles behind on technology, because you just can't get everybody to change fast enough to stay up with the top level technology. And indeed, a lot of the problems that the Bitcoin people are attacking now are problems which could also be solved, and quite possibly will be solved using old technology, just because it's catching up and it's got more robustness and better known, and is therefore going to be picked up. So one of the challenges is really to work out how there is that killer app that really is going to start one of these things. Where's the green field? Where's the disaster you can fix, and so on. I don't want to be a downer on the end of 2 days of enthusiasm, and I like the energy in this room. It's really, really great compared to a lot of the conferences I speak at. But we have to start getting practical about blockchain and Bitcoin if it's going to really take us somewhere. We have to solve these problems. Not so much why it's going to be the best thing, but how are you going to get there? Thanks.